On the edge of Route 80, a struggling widow facing debt and loneliness opened her diner to 18 bikers during a deadly Montana blizzard. By morning, more than 100 motorcycles thundered at her door. What could one woman have done to move such an army of men? The copper lantern sat like a stubborn ember on the edge of Route 80, a squat brick building with a flickering neon sign that hummed against the empty dark. Snow slashed across the Montana plains, a white curtain pulled tight by a wind that cared nothing for flesh or stone. Ellen Felton, 62 years old and tired in ways that went deeper than her bones, stood behind the counter wiping down surfaces that hadn't seen paying customers in days. Her late husband, Tom, used to say the copper lantern was a beacon for the road. He'd fought in Vietnam, come home broken but alive, and poured his remaining strength into building a place where truckers, bikers, and farmers could warm their hands and swap stories. For decades, it had worked. But after Tom passed, the regulars drifted away, the highway traffic thinned, and corporate truck stops swallowed what little business was left. Now the diner bled debt. Ellen's mailbox was a graveyard of overdue bills. She looked at the pot simmering on the stove, a thin broth stretched with potatoes and carrots, the last of her pantry. It wasn't enough for a menu, but she couldn't bring herself to stop cooking. Habit, hope, something in between. Then came the sound. Low at first, like thunder muffled by the storm. Ellen stepped to the frosted window, heart quickening. Headlights cut through the blizzard, moving information, crawling closer until the unmistakable growl of Harley-Davidson engines rattled her windows. One bike became 3, then 6, then a whole line, headlights glaring like a procession of ghosts. They pulled in hard, tires skidding against ice, chrome shivering under the neon glow. Their jackets were crow-wing black, the patch of the Hell's Angels catching the light. Ellen's pulse spiked. Their reputation didn't need words. Everyone on the highway knew what it meant. Yet, standing there with her hand braced against the counter, she also remembered her husband's voice. Everyone who walks through that door deserves a fair chance, at least until they prove otherwise. The door blasted open, snow rushing in ahead of a massive figure. He was easily 6'4", shoulders wide enough to block the wind. His beard was streaked with gray, his leather jacket heavy with years of road wear. Reed the Bear MacAllister. Ellen didn't know his name yet, but she could read the authority in the way his men looked to him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "We need shelter. Won't stay long." Ellen glanced at the frost creeping across the windows, the storm swallowing the horizon. Without heat and food, no one out there would survive. She swallowed, straightened, and gave the only answer she could live with. "Come in. Close the door behind you. You're letting the warmth out." The men filed in, stamping snow from their boots, the air thick with leather, gasoline, and road grit. Ellen moved quickly, ladling broth into chipped bowls, sliding them across the counter as though she'd been expecting them all along. "You sure about this?" one biker muttered, eyeing her with suspicion. His voice carried more disbelief than hostility. "Food's hot. Eat while it lasts," she said simply. The bear studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. His men took seats, pulling off gloves and helmets, steam rising from their gear. Silence at first, broken only by spoons clinking against ceramic. Then one of them, younger than the rest with a scar along his cheek, spoke. "This soup reminds me of something. Long time ago when my dad came home from Nam. Some nurse made him sit, eat, when he swore he couldn't stomach another thing." Ellen's hands froze around the counter rag. Memories rushed back. The smell of disinfectant, the cries of wounded soldiers, her own trembling hands pushing tin bowls toward boys who looked too young to shave. She looked closer at the scarred biker. There was something of that soldier's face in him. She set the rag down, leaned closer. "Where did your father serve?" The young man's eyes narrowed. "Quang Tri, 71. Her chest tightened. She had been there. She remembered the boy's father. Gaunt, feverish, his arm shattered by shrapnel. She remembered coaxing him to eat broth she'd scrounged from a Vietnamese cook's pot. She had saved his life not with medicine, but with food and stubbornness. "You're his boy," she whispered. He used to hum Johnny Cash songs under his breath. The biker blinked, stunned. The room went quiet as every man stared at Ellen. From the far end of the counter, the bear leaned forward. His heavy brows furrowed, but his tone was measured. "Seems like you've got more history with us than you realize, ma'am." Ellen didn't answer. She just kept pouring soup, her hand steady now, her voice calm. "Eat. The storm isn't letting up tonight." For hours, the copper lantern filled with a warmth it hadn't known in years. The bikers laughed, told stories, thawed under Ellen's quiet authority. She moved among them like she had in the field hospital decades ago, not as a waitress but as a caretaker. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the copper lantern, something unexpected was stirring. The bear kept watching her, eyes dark and thoughtful, as if weighing a truth too heavy to speak yet. Ellen felt a forgotten warmth stirring inside her, as if the old walls of the lantern were remembering what it meant to be alive. The storm had buried the parking lot by the time the clock struck midnight, muffling the world outside into a white silence broken only by the groan of wind against the windows. Inside, the copper lantern was alive with heat, leather jackets draped over chair backs, boots thawing along the vents, the smell of coffee and soup replacing the scent of fear that had first walked through the door. Ellen moved among them quietly, her apron dusted with flour, carrying a tray of cornbread she had unearthed from the freezer, her last hidden reserve. The men accepted it with gratitude that surprised her. Tough faces softened as they tore pieces with rough hands, steam curling upward. Ty, the scarred rider who had spoken earlier, leaned against the counter with something metallic in his grip. He set a pair of dog tags down carefully, sliding them toward Ellen as though handing over an heirloom. "My dad wore these," he said, voice edged with awe. "Said a nurse saved his life in Quang Tri, kept feeding him when he swore he couldn't eat." He told that story like it was the reason he came home. Ellen's chest tightened. She picked up the tags, cool against her skin, and for a moment she was 20 years old again, standing in a humid tent with the sound of mortars far too close. She remembered his father, remembered pressing soup to his lips and coaxing him to hum Johnny Cash until his breathing steadied. She looked at Ty, really looked, and saw the same sharp jaw, the same defiance. "He had a laugh that made the ward feel lighter," she said softly. "You carry that same spark." The room stilled. The bikers exchanged glances, and for the first time they seemed less like strangers and more like men tethered to her by invisible lines of history. On the far side of the counter, a restless rider called Rook tapped his knuckles against a mug. His eyes darted like a man still fighting old battles. Ellen moved closer, recognizing the tremor. "You've been sober a while," she said, not asking, simply knowing. 9 months, Rook admitted, his voice low. "Hardest storm I've had since I quit. I saw you once at the county VA. You told me to give my hands a job before my head betrayed me. Built a bike from scraps. Bolts instead of needles." Ellen smiled faintly, reaching beneath the counter. She slid a worn notebook toward him. "When your hands can't keep up, right? And if words fail, hand this to someone you trust." She glanced at the bear. Even him. The bear inclined his head slowly, his eyes dark and unreadable, but something in his posture eased. Before Rook could reply, a racking cough tore through the warmth. All heads turned to Hawkins, one of the older riders, who sagged forward, his face pale under the harsh lights. Ellen was moving before anyone else, her instincts older than her wrinkles. "Back booth," she ordered. "Lay him flat. Tie towels. Rook, boil water. Bear, steady him." Her voice carried the weight of command, and the bikers fell into motion. Within moments, the diner shifted into something closer to a field station than a roadside cafe. Hawkins wheezed, chest rattling with pneumonia, eyes wide with panic. Ellen pressed her stethoscope to his ribs, then reached for the oxygen tank she kept for highway wrecks. "He needs warmth and steam," she said. "We keep his lungs open long enough, he'll make it through the night." The men sprang into action. Towels were rolled into a tent, kettles set to boil, menthol rubs spread beneath his nose. Ellen worked quickly, voice calm, guiding them as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Slowly, Hawkins' breathing steadied, his eyes fluttering with exhausted gratitude. A wave of relief passed through the room. Just as the furnace groaned, the lights faltered, and the diner exhaled a long, cold breath. The copper lantern exhaled its last gust of heat. "Generator?" the bear asked. "In the shed," Ellen replied, shrugging into her coat. "Old and stubborn." The bear didn't waste words. He signaled Ty and a lanky rider named Piper. Together they fought their way through the snow, shoulders bent against the gale. The padlock was frozen, but Piper warmed it with a lighter, hands shaking. The bear ripped it open with brute strength, revealing the dust-covered generator inside. "Needs gas," Piper muttered. He siphoned fuel from his Harley, lips pursed around a vinyl tube. Ty cleared the exhaust path while the bear taped a frayed wire. Piper coaxed the cord once, twice. On the third pull, the engine sputtered. On the fourth, it caught, growling like a beast dragged from sleep. When the warmth returned, so did breath. Hawkins dozed under Ellen's watch, his hand gripping hers with the gratitude of a man who knew how close the line had been. The bear stood back, arms folded, watching her with something like reverence. The storm outside howled without mercy, but inside the copper lantern the air changed. Stories spilled out like confessions. Ty spoke of a father who came home but never healed. Rook admitted he ticked off each day like a tally on his skin. Some nights the dreams dragged him back to the needle, and waking up sober felt like reclaiming stolen ground. Piper revealed he had once been an army mechanic, a man who understood engines better than people, until the uniform came off and silence replaced orders. Ellen listened, moving like tidewater, refilling mugs, tilting her head so each man felt seen. She brought out a shoebox from beneath the register, scattering Polaroids across the counter. Young soldiers with bandaged arms, grins wide despite the blood. She told their names, not their ranks, and for a while the bikers leaned in, humbled by the reminder that they were not the first to carry scars. Ellen pointed at one photo, her finger trembling. "He never made it home," she whispered, and the bikers lowered their heads as if at a graveside. The bear lingered longest, his eyes fixed not on the photos but on Ellen herself. He seemed to be measuring something, a memory stirring in him that he did not yet share. Around them the copper lantern glowed, a refuge against the storm, and for the first time in decades Ellen felt the old fire of purpose burn steady in her chest. By dawn the storm had not broken. If anything, it pressed heavier, bending trees and swallowing the horizon in white. The copper lantern had become a strange oasis, its windows fogged with breath, its counters cluttered with mugs, dog tags, and Ellen's shoebox of fading Polaroids. Hawkins slept in the back booth, his breathing steadier, blankets piled high around him. The men moved quietly now, as though unwilling to disturb the fragile peace the night had built. Ellen poured coffee into the last clean cups. Her hands trembled with fatigue, but her voice was steady as she asked, "Cream or sugar?" The question was absurd in its normalcy, and for a moment the bikers smiled. She was still serving them like customers, though what they'd shared was far deeper than a transaction. The bear stood apart near the window, arms crossed. The frost on the glass haloed him in pale light, but his mind seemed far away. He turned when Ellen approached. "You run this place alone?" he asked. She nodded. "Since Tom passed. My son lives 2 states away. Truck driving keeps him on the road. I kept the lantern open because, well, this was his dream. Didn't think it would end like this." The bear's gaze fell on the stack of unpaid bills peeking from a ledger on the shelf. He didn't comment, but Ellen saw the way his jaw tightened. Ty and Rook drifted over, drawn by something unsaid. The bear looked at them, then at the rest of his crew, and his voice dropped low. "You all remember what I told you about the chain?" Several of the men straightened, their expressions shifting from relaxed to alert. Ellen frowned. "What chain?" The bear studied her, weighing trust. Then, slowly, he explained. "There's a network, not written, not spoken outside our circles. Veterans, truckers, bikers, folks who know what it's like to live on the road. You do right by one, word spreads faster than radio waves. We call it the Phantom Network because you can't see it until you need it. Then it's everywhere. Ellen's brow furrowed. And you think a story about soup in a storm is enough to wake it? The bear leaned closer. Lady, last night you saved Hawkins. You put hope in Rook's hands. Ty found his father's ghost sitting right here at your counter. That isn't soup. That's something worth more than gold. And I know men who'd ride through hell itself to stand behind it. He pulled a battered flip phone from his pocket. Most of the bikers still clung to old tech, distrustful of screens that could be tracked. He dialed slowly, then stepped into the back hallway, his voice rumbling low as he spoke into the receiver. Ty exhaled. If he's calling who I think he's calling, you might want to put more coffee on, ma'am. Ellen glanced at the snow-choked road outside. No one's driving through this storm. Rook grinned, a rare flicker of humor. You'll see. Hours crawled by, each one stitched with the sound of the storm hammering the roof. Ellen cleaned as best she could, stacking empty bowls, sweeping up melted snow. The men patched the generator line properly, Piper soldering connections with the precision of a surgeon. Hawkins woke, groggy but alive, and managed a weak thumbs-up that drew cheers from his brothers. Then, sometime near mid-afternoon, Ellen noticed it, the faint thrum beneath the wind. At first it was only a vibration in the air, then a chorus of engines layering one over another until the storm itself seemed to shudder. The bear returned from the hallway, his face unreadable, but he moved to the door and pushed it open against the gale. The sound roared in. Headlights pierced the blizzard, not in a line but in waves. First a handful of bikes, then dozens. Through the white haze emerged Harleys and Indians streaked with ice, Triumphs crusted in road salt, and trucks piled high under flapping tarps. A procession carved from the highway itself, their arrival shaking the diner's lot like a myth come to life. Ellen's heart hammered. She stepped to the door, clutching the frame, eyes wide. "Dear Lord," she whispered. For a moment she thought of Tom, her husband, how he had once dreamed of this place being a beacon. Now the road itself seemed to answer that dream. In minutes, the copper lantern was surrounded. More than 50 bikes at first, then 70, then still more, their numbers climbing as stragglers arrived from the highway. By the time the storm dimmed to flurries, the lot was crowded with over 100 engines, their thunder muted but undeniable. Riders dismounted, veterans in old field jackets climbed from pickups, truckers in reflective vests shook snow from their hats. The bear turned to Ellen. His gravel voice carried a weight that silenced even the storm. "They came because you matter, because what you gave us last night deserves to be remembered, and because you shouldn't fight alone anymore." Ellen's throat closed. She wanted to protest, to say she had nothing to give, but her voice broke. Instead she watched as riders pulled crates from their saddlebags, envelopes sealed with tape, bundles of cash wrapped in rubber bands. She watched truckers unload blankets, food, even tools for the generator. The parking lot became a hive of motion, strangers united by something she had thought was gone from the world. Inside, Ty lifted Hawkins to a window so he could see. The older man's eyes filled with tears at the sight of the convoy gathered for them. Rook gripped Ellen's shoulder, steadying her as if she were the one in need of saving. And through it all, the bear stood at her side, a sentinel with frost in his beard and something close to reverence in his eyes. The Phantom Network had awakened, and the copper lantern was no longer alone in the storm. The snow eased by morning, thinning into pale ribbons that drifted off the highway. What remained was silence broken only by the slow rumble of idling engines. Ellen pushed open the diner's door and stepped into the cold. Her breath clouded in the air, and before her stretched a sight she could hardly comprehend. Rows upon rows of motorcycles glinting under a weak Montana sun, their chrome catching what little light the day offered. Truck cabs lined the shoulder, drivers leaning on their doors, and veterans in faded jackets stamped their boots against the frost. The copper lantern, which only yesterday had felt like a dying ember, was now the center of a storm of men and machines. One by one, riders began moving forward, forming a loose semicircle around Ellen. They weren't loud, not the way she expected. Their engines softened into silence, helmets tucked under arms, the gravity of the moment binding them into quiet respect. A tall rider in a weathered denim vest approached first. He carried a sealed envelope and laid it gently on the counter outside the door. "For keeping us alive," he said simply, then stepped back. Another followed, then another. Envelopes stacked one over the other, thick with bills. A trucker came forward next, dropping a jar heavy with coins. "For the coffee you poured when I didn't have a dime," he told her. "You remembered my name when no one else did." Soon there was no stopping it. The men moved in waves, dropping what they had. Folded 20s, rolled 50s, stacks bound in rubber bands. Some carried food, canned goods, spare parts for the furnace, boxes of tools. Someone wheeled out a welder from the back of a flatbed. Another dropped a set of tires at the door. The offerings piled into a mountain of help. Ellen stood frozen, her apron pressed to her chest, tears burning her eyes. "I don't understand," she whispered. The bear stepped beside her, his massive hand steadying her shoulder. "You gave everything you had last night. Soup from an empty cupboard. Kindness when no one asked for it. We don't forget that. Not men like us." He lifted a hand, and the crowd hushed. His voice carried, gravelly but sure. "The copper lantern ain't dying. Not while we're breathing. This place will stand as a post for every man and woman who needs a roof, a meal, a moment of dignity. From now on, this diner belongs to the road and to her." A roar answered him. Not a shout, but the thunder of engines firing to life all at once. 100 throats of steel echoing across the valley. The sound rolled through Ellen's bones, not as menace but as benediction. Inside, Ty counted the envelopes with shaking hands. 75 grand, maybe more, he muttered, awed. "Enough to clear your debts, rebuild the kitchen, keep the lights burning," Rook added. "And we'll build you a shop out back, place for repairs, a safe corner for vets to work when the noise gets too loud inside their heads." Piper spread a blueprint he'd sketched on scrap paper. A garage bay, tool benches, a loft for storage. "We can put it up in a weekend with the right crew. This storm brought everyone. You'll never get a better chance." Ellen looked from the paper to the men, their rough faces shining with something pure. Hope, loyalty, belief. Her throat tightened. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You already did," the bear answered. That night the work began. Floodlights rigged from truck beds lit the snowy lot. Some men shoveled paths to clear space for building. Others repaired the sagging roof shingles while Piper directed like an architect possessed. Ellen moved among them with pots of coffee, her diner alive again with the clang of hammers and bursts of laughter. Hawkins, bundled in blankets, sat propped near the window, grinning at the spectacle. By the time dawn painted the horizon pink, the copper lantern stood transformed. A reinforced roof, fresh wiring, and behind it the beginnings of a workshop framed in timber. It wasn't finished, but it was real. More real than the dreams Ellen had been clinging to alone. The men gathered in front of the diner, their engines idling in salute. Ty stepped forward, holding the shoebox of Polaroids she had shared the night before. He set it on the counter. "These don't belong in a box anymore," he said. "They belong on the wall. A gallery of those who carried us here." Rook nodded. "You're the keeper now, Ellen. The angel of Route 80. The name rose first as a murmur, then swelled into a chorus. Angel of Route 80, etched into the cold air like a vow that would never melt away. Ellen covered her face with trembling hands. For years she had lit a lamp for ghosts, and now the living had answered its glow. The bear leaned close, his voice meant only for her. "You don't ride alone anymore." Engines thundered once more, then peeled away in waves, vanishing down the highway in every direction. But the copper lantern no longer stood empty. Ellen watched them go, the sound lingering like a hymn. She turned back inside, the walls breathing of paint and coffee, and understood at last. Tom's dream had returned, not by profit, but by the road's faith in her open door. The copper lantern no longer stood as one woman's burden. It had become the road's own sanctuary, claimed by every soul it sheltered. This story reminds us that one act of kindness can echo through countless lives. If you were in Ellen's place, would you have opened the door that night? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories of honor and humanity. See you in the next video.